Hello, I'm Scott Wipperman, the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church. And no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, know that you're welcome here. We hope you enjoy today's service on this video, and we invite you to come join us for worship anytime that you would like, or join us in any of the other activities of the church. For more information about First Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at fpchelena.com or call us at 442-4775. God bless.
And our gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of Mark, the first chapter. Previous to this, Jesus has picked up a few disciples. So Jesus and his disciples, went to Capernaum. And when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teachings, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." And the impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. The word of the Lord. Well, the word authority sometimes carries a rather negative connotation. You know, when you kind of slid through that stop sign and you went on and all of a sudden you see those red and blue lights in your rearview mirror, that kind of authority isn't overly pleasing to you at that particular time. Authority sometimes is viewed as bending people to the authority's will through their power of some form, their strength, their might, their financial ability, their political power. Sometimes authority carries a somewhat negative connotation with it. But today, authority carries a different word, a different meaning with it. Now, let's do a little background here first. There were the teachers of the law, which are also often called rabbis or teachers. Jesus is often called a teacher or a rabbi. And these were people who were knowledgeable of the Torah. And there was an oral Torah and there was a written Torah at this time. And most people only had access to the oral Torah. And so they would come to the synagogue and listen to a teacher who would tell them the oral tradition. Because every adult Israelite was expected to know the law, to know what was in the Torah. Then there were scribes. Scribes were people who could read and write. They weren't necessarily knowledgeable religiously, but they could read and write. And so in those synagogues that had scrolls, it would be a scribe who would read the scroll on a given Sunday, on a given Sabbath. And quite often the scribe might select the roll, or sometimes it would be that the leader of the synagogue would appoint which scribe was going to read this week and who was going to speak. And so in the beginning of this Mark text, we have here a teaching that's taking place. Now it's interesting. There's a Jewish book called the Midrash. And this book will have a bit of scripture in it, and it's normally in the top middle part of the page. And all around this scripture is various rabbis' take on this particular scripture. And quite often these various rabbis are contradicting one another in their understanding, in their interpretation of this scripture. And this is quite often what the rabbis taught. They would teach what was said by some historical, well-known rabbis. They would raise up their views of a given text that was being done that Sunday. But Jesus comes in. We assume he was invited. It doesn't say that in the text. It could have been that Jesus just appointed himself that day to read a scroll. But given this is the first public appearance of Jesus in Mark, that could be the case, but more than likely Jesus has been around Galilee and Capernaum a little bit, and people are beginning to know about him and hear about him. And so he was likely invited by the leader of the synagogue to come that Sunday and preach or to read the scripture and to talk. And Jesus comes in, selects a scripture, a scroll, and reads it. And the people are amazed. This is a very positive amazed in the Greek. There is no negative connotation to this. They were awed at what Christ said and what he spoke that way. Because he spoke not like the teachers of the law. He spoke as one who had authority, not one who had to rely on some other person's interpretation, but one who knew and can tell from that knowledge and teach from that knowledge. He had authority. They were awed, they were amazed, because he was likely bringing out some new understanding, some different teaching, as Jesus so often does. It's interesting. Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus was teaching. Mark doesn't even tell us the scroll or the text he was reading. He's focused on the reaction of the people upon hearing Jesus and hearing him teach. So Jesus likely, as we see later on in the Gospels, was shedding some new light on some text that was being read that day. Was saying something that maybe opened people's imaginations, that showed them something they hadn't seen before that was laying there. Likely something that was unprecedented, maybe he said. Maybe even shocking and surprising as to what he said. Jesus might even been saying something that contradicted the teachings, the historical teachings of what other rabbis had said. And the people were amazed. They were surprised. And then an unclean man comes into the synagogue. A man with an unclean spirit. Mark in the gospel makes a clear distinction between people who have diseases and people who have unclean spirits. This isn't a man with a mental condition. That would be the disease side for Mark. This is a man with an unclean spirit. And the unclean spirit addresses Jesus. Now, first, this is a little unusual because someone who's unclean shouldn't be in the synagogue in the first place. And people's first reaction might have been to get this unclean man out of the synagogue. But he addresses Jesus, and he knows who Jesus is. He calls him by name, Jesus of Nazareth. If we look at the extra-biblical discussions of exorcism, quite often the person doing the exorcising uses the name of the spirit that they're trying to exorcise from the person as a form of power over that spirit. And so maybe in this case the spirit was trying the opposite. By calling Jesus, his name, was trying to get power over Jesus, but it worked to no avail. Because Jesus simply tells the man to be quiet. And in this instance, Jesus isn't trying to keep any kind of secret. This is just the way of having power over that spirit, of telling him to be quiet and to go away, to get out of here. Which the spirit does. Leaves this man with a shriek, and now the people are even more amazed. Not only does this Jesus of Nazareth teach with authority differently than the rabbis and the teachers of the law teach, but even has power over spirits. And it's interesting to note, Jesus says two things: be quiet, get out. There's no incantations. There's no props. There's no special words, secret words that have to be said to make this happen. He just says simply these two things. Be quiet. Get out. And it happens immediately. People who may have heard about exorcisms at the time, maybe they had witnessed one, or maybe they'd heard about one or two, those exorcisms probably took a long time and often maybe had questionable results. And here, Jesus says two things, and immediately the results happen. This is an amazing man. This is a man of power beyond what any of them had ever seen before. So when we read Jesus' teachings in the Bible, are you amazed? Are you in awe when you read these things? Does Jesus come across as the authority? Is he more authoritative than other authorities in our world? Is he more authoritative than newscasters or experts in some subject matter? Scientists? Does he have more authority for you than political leaders or commentators on TV or people who get up and lead cults and conventions and groups? Does he? Does he put you in awe? Does he have that authority for you? Why? Maybe more importantly, why not? Yes, we've maybe read some of these words before, so they aren't completely new to us. Not the first time we've heard it. And so maybe it isn't quite as novel. But are we awed? Are we amazed at the words that Jesus says? There are some things that have shifted societally from Jesus' time to our time. And some things that would have been utter shocks to the people who read these texts back then are relatively normative to us now. One is the roles of men and women. Back then, women didn't speak to men in public, and you only spoke to your husband if he spoke to you first in public. Women who spoke to men were assumed to be prostitutes. And men didn't teach women, right? But Jesus did these things. Jesus spoke with women. Jesus taught women. Jesus even let a woman teach him. This would have been very, very shocking, outlandish. You might remember the story about the woman at the well, and when the disciples had went off to get some food, come back and find Jesus talking to this woman, they're floored. That stuff all kind of just passes us by because that's not an issue anymore in our society. But other things that Jesus says, should we not be amazed at them? Not be in awe at them? Sometimes maybe we try to suppress that amazement and that awe by trying to sanitize Jesus a little bit. Domesticate him some in the things he says. Some of those things that seem radical to us, we try to push off somehow. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great theologian, said that we can get around and we can argue about what the Beatitudes mean, or we can just do it. We could be amazed by what Jesus says in the Beatitudes. We could be in awe of that. We could be shocked, but be informed to have these things lead our lives. Because shouldn't we expect Jesus to be radical today just as much as he was back then? He tells us quite a few things that go contrary to the voices of our society, that go contrary to the voices of the quote-unquote authorities in this time. And which ones are we going to listen to? Which ones are we going to be in awe of? Where do we go to find a teacher that we can lean on? So we should expect to be shaken, to be stirred, to be awed, to find it radical things that we read that Jesus teaches us in the Bible. Don't be ashamed or surprised about that. Read the Bible with that expectation that you are going to be in awe, that you are going to be amazed, that you're going to find what Jesus says is radical and new. Be open to this amazing, this awesome teacher. Be open.